signs up. Hopefully you saw them. Band people, are the signs still up, or did somebody take them down?
I think they're still up.
I think so.
Okay, could somebody just take them down next time you go over there? So nobody misunderstands that it's this Wednesday, it's not. Okay, we were talking about opera. We still have a little bit more opera to talk about. We were in the middle of Verdi, I think. Most of Verdi's operas are serious. The lone exception of the big-time Verdi operas that's a comic opera is one called Falstaff. Falstaff is a character in several Shakespeare plays. He's kind of a big, fat, clumsy oaf, and people make fun of him a lot. And he's a sort of a tragic comic character as a result. The stories of Verdi operas come from the works of superior writers. Shakespeare, as we named, Lord Byron, Dumas, Victor Hugo, Schiller. The main requirements for Verdi in a libretto were that it requires strong, fast action and strong emotional situations, and therefore call for vigorous rhythm. The story did not have to be believable. So in a Verdi opera, you can expect to find exceedingly strong conflict between people who are tormented and who are driven to violent action, sometimes even murder. They could have unbelievable coincidences, unlikely characters, and things like that. It's a vehicle for beautiful singing. A Verdi opera is usually in 4 acts, and the last act typically opens with a prayer scene sung by the heroine, backed up by the chorus.
Which act does that say?
The last act. Just as we subjected Beethoven to a periodization, typically people make a periodization for Verdi. We won't go into it with much detail, but suffice it to say that the early operas are marked by strong, raw emotions. There is a notable one in the early operas called Nabucco, N-A-B-U-C-C-O. Nabucco is simply the Italian spelling for the biblical character Nebuchadnezzar. You all watching the Bible series on the History Channel right now? We just had Nebuchadnezzar, what was it, yesterday? Or earlier, I can't remember. After this, pretty soon, however, his style begins to portray characters with deeper and more sophisticated psychology. That is the mark of middle and late Verdi, deeper and more sophisticated psychology. In the middle period, he starts to be a little bit experimental. So there's a little more adventurous harmony, more unusual combinations of the soloist, the chorus, and maybe groups of soloists. And the orchestra is treated with greater care, greater originality. The orchestra in Verdi is very, very important. He also begins to have a theme or even just a motive start to recur at crucial points in the opera. That gives it both dramatic unity and musical unity. The masterpiece of the middle period would be Aida, A-I-D-A, Aida. A masterpiece both musically and dramatically. Certainly in terms of the dramatic structure, the development of the characters, and the emotional impact and high quality of the music. Well, after Aida, it was 16 years before his next opera. That next opera was Otello, O-T-E-L-L-O, Otello. based on the Shakespeare play of the same name. Well, a lot had changed in music during this time. Othello is clearly a different kind of composition from Aida and all of his operas before that. There was a kind of a philosophical war that Verdi carried on between himself and the philosophy and style of the German Richard Wagner. And although he rejected that Wagnerian style, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, Othello is still an opera that mixes in some Wagner-like characteristics. Well, one of those characteristics is that Othello is a lot more continuous and all tied together, which is a lot like a Wagnerian opera. Most operas up until the time of Wagner were what we call number operas, which is to say that the movements are clearly separated and you can give them numbers, and that there's a sort of a pause in the action and an opportunity for the audience to applaud after each one of those numbers. In a Wagnerian opera, as we will see, you don't do that. The music is so continuous that there is no place where the music stops and you could applaud until the end of an act. So very few opportunities for applause. Well, Othello by Verdi starts to be a lot more continuous. Not as extremely so as Wagner, but much more so than his own operas before that. Throughout his career, Verdi's operas are characterized by a rather fundamental simplicity of expression, combined with a rather primitive emotional force which drives people to action. Verdi had no use for the worship of nature. Instead, he was interested in the real emotions of real people. Probably this is why the operas of Verdi have a much bigger, wider audience than the operas of Wagner. Operas of Wagner, yes, we get that they are great, but they are kind of an acquired taste, whereas the entire operatic community loves Verdi operas, and they're done constantly in all the operatic capitals of the world, including places like New York, Chicago, San Francisco. One of the pervasive traits of the Romantic period is the strong mutual influence between music and literature. This is especially true in German opera. Germany is a country which did not have the long tradition of opera the way Italy had. And as a result, then, German composers tended to be more experimental in their approach because they're coming to it much later. Time for a great big list of the characteristics of German opera. The first half of the list are the general characteristics of German opera composers. The last half of the list we're going to identify as characteristics specifically for Wagner. All right, so general characteristics of German Romantic opera. First, the plots come from medieval history, legend, or fairy tale. Involving supernatural beings and events. Which are tied to the fate of the characters. Two, human characters are representative of supernatural forces, either good or evil. Human characters are representative of supernatural forces, whether it's good or evil. Related to that, number 3, the triumph of good over evil. And for a German composer, this is often portrayed as some kind of salvation or redemption. So if it isn't rather religious, it certainly has an allusion to it, sort of an extension of the rescue opera principle. But in any case, the polarity between good and evil is prevalent in German opera, with the triumph of good eventually over evil. Number 4, simple folk-like melodies of German heritage. Five, harmony used for dramatic expression. Not just color, but for dramatic expression. 6, the orchestra used for dramatic expression. 7, drama is even more important than singing. 8, the atmosphere or the mood is of great importance. 9, the use of recurring themes associated with specific characters or events. And in a way, I think we could say that this is an operatic extension of the cyclical technique. What is that?
The use of a theme.
Use of melodic material across all the movements. Well, the use of the same melodic material associated with a particular character or event throughout the opera would be kind of the operatic equivalent of that. Now, these first 9 characteristics are first established by the composer von Weber, W-E-B-E-R, von Weber, Carl Maria von Weber. Constanz Mozart was a von Weber, if you recall. It was a very important musical family. The opera by Weber is entitled Der Freischütz. There's no translation of the word Freischütz. The Freischütz. All right, well, as we continue the list, certainly the towering figure in German Romantic opera is Richard, not Richard, Richard Wagner. W-A-G-N-E-R, Wagner.
No, I mean the first name.
Richard, spelled like Richard, but pronounced Richard.
Oh, it's just pronounced that way, sorry.
He was a prolific composer for sure, but also a very prolific writer with considerable influence over Romantic thought, Romantic philosophy. And therefore, lots of influence about music, literature, drama, political issues, moral issues. The entire prose works of Wagner, if you line the books up next to each other, would be like this. Why? The prose works of Wagner, not just the musical works. So when we say a prolific writer, we mean a lot. His harmony is so consistently chromatic that he is one of the first steps towards the total breakdown of tonality, the feeling of key, which occurs later in the 20th century. He also invents a new type of opera. He doesn't call his operas. He calls them music dramas. So although we'll use the term opera just for short, when we're talking about Wagner, we technically are talking about a music drama. Okay, so the characteristics of a Wagnerian music drama are all of the above plus the following. So let's continue the list. 10. The music flows very continuously with almost no stops. We refer to this style in Wagner as endless melody. Endless melody. 11. A very large and very colorful orchestra requiring strong singers to be able to sing against it. People who make their livings as Wagnerian sopranos or Wagnerian tenors are kind of freaks of nature. And they're not especially successful at giving intimate recitals with piano because their voices are just so big and all-encompassing. They have to be to sing through a Wagnerian orchestra. We'll see why in just a second.
So loud and for a long time they could all their voices, or do they have?
This is why we say they're freaks of nature. Because they have not only the vocal size, but they have the endurance to be able to sing that loudly at that tessitura and survive it. And there have been plenty of young American singers who have gone to Germany and tried to sing Wagner a little bit too early and ruined themselves and ended their careers prematurely because the voice just gives out and can't be rehabilitated sometimes. So it's tough enough singing in German in opera anyway, but with Wagner, there's just no let up in the pressure because with high notes, sustained notes, so loud all the time, the tissue is pretty delicate and sensitive, and it's easy to wreck yourself, and many people have. Number 12, the use of recurring themes is even more elaborate and extreme. And here's a term used by Dr. Herrera when he was here. Leitmotif, which sort of translates out to leading motive, but the word leading doesn't help you very much. It's just what they mean. Well, these leitmotifs are short melodic phrases, or motives would be good, that are attached to a person, a place, a thing, an idea, an emotion, and anything. And so it's supposed to have a Pavlovian effect on the listener, so that every time, let's say it's a person, the person comes to the stage or is even referred to, there's this little motive that happens in the orchestra that you're supposed to put together. Well, that means that later on in the opera, the person doesn't have to be anywhere nearby. They can even be dead. And when you hear that little motive, it's supposed to bring to mind that person or whatever it is that it represents. Now, the really difficult thing about this is that in a Wagnerian music drama, there could be 40 or 50 of them. And so how are you going to remember all those? Well, probably with outside study, you know. So Wagnerian operas are something to take a commitment if you're really going to understand the full import of what all of those little phrases, those leitmotifs, actually mean. Now, what if, just like in thematic transformation, like we mentioned in symphonic poem, what if the character is kind of a bad guy and becomes more of a good guy by the time the opera's over? His leitmotif is going to evolve into something related but organically different by the time it's over. You're supposed to follow all this too, so that you get the full symbolic meaning of it all. It's pretty difficult. 13. Full thick orchestration nearly all the time. This is why you have such loud music. This is why you have such a tall score and a thick texture all the time. Is that not only are there a lot of instruments, but they play most of the time. They don't just sit there for 90 bars at a time and come in later on, unless it's the triangle or something like that. But the instruments play all the time. That's why it's such a big, full sound, and why it's so difficult on the voice to be able to penetrate over the orchestra. Now, of course, as he said in Bayreuth, that's a little bit different because the orchestra is so separated and the singers have a little bit easier time of it. But in a normal opera house, like the Met, La Scala, any place that you might name, the orchestra's in the pit in front of the singers. You know, that's what makes it so difficult on the singers. We're talking about a huge, massive block of sound that you have to be singing through at all times.
And being that it's so pedal to the metal all the time, wouldn't you think that the audience would get tired of it, or it's just?
Well, you've got so much exciting, compelling music and chromatic, colorful, somewhat dissonant harmony at the same time that you're just stirred up constantly. And some of these leitmotifs that come up are very emotional sounding. And once you've experienced something with the singer for a while and you're tied up in it, you know, when that comes up, then it just grips your heart. So there were people at the time who were just absolutely mesmerized by the music. It was so magnetic, along with his own magnetic personality, that it was a new emotional high for people. You either loved him or you hated him. 14, a declamatory arioso style. It is not what you would call recitative. It's not quite what you would call aria. A declamatory arioso style. Remember when we first used the term arioso, we said it was in between recitative and aria, but hard to say exactly where in between. 15, the heavy use of symbolism. What is a symbol? A symbol is something that represents more than what it is. Heavy use of symbolism. It's another thing that makes it a little hard to understand. 16, certain keys associated with certain characters. 17, the operas are very long. A Wagnerian opera would typically start about 4 in the afternoon, go for a couple of hours, break for dinner, come back, restart, 8 o'clock, go past 10, maybe till 11, something like that. They're very long. He just had so many ideas. He just had so much to say. And it was also intricately interrelated that it took a long time to get all those interrelationships all worked out. 18, he wrote the libretti himself. Now, especially important among his operas, or we should say music dramas, is a 4-opera cycle called Der Ring des Nibelungen. An interrelated cycle of 4 long operas. You'll have to regurgitate the titles on your exam. You can take them out of the text. Take a long time to write the German up here for all. In this cycle, they're basically searching for this magic ring across these 4 long operas. He didn't write them immediately together, didn't even write them back to back. He wrote them over the span of about 25 years. So he had this vision of what he wanted them to be, but it took a long time to get the whole cycle in place. Also wrote the librettos himself. That's right. Nobody else was good enough. Could only do it himself. It's a legendary story. Yeah, German mythology. All right, well, the first complete performance of this, which we refer to as the Ring Cycle, took place in the theater, built especially, according to his specifications, at Bayreuth. And by the way, Bayreuth is spelled Bayreuth. And I think the overall story is in your text as well. Up in Washington State, for a while, they used to do the entire ring cycle every year over a week or 2 weeks or something like that. It's pretty expensive to do those 4, and I think the audience has sort of dribbled away a little bit, so they don't do it every year anymore. They just do it every several years. And it's probably the only place in the country where the ring cycle is done, although the Met did produce all 4 of them, and they put them on video so that you actually can buy them on video. And they're actually quite magnificent performances. For Wagner, the composite dramatic package was more important to him than any of the components of the package. The package would be the singing, the orchestra, the acting, the lights, the sets, the costumes, the libretto, all of it that go together in this dramatic package. The overall package was much more important than any of the pieces in there. He was a fanatic about that, and this composite package actually has a word we use to identify it, and that's Gesamtkunstwerk. And I want you to really know this word. This would be complete artwork. And that's really what it means, a complete artwork. But you must use this word. Educated people in other disciplines know this word and use this word. They may not know anything about thought, but it is a word that's used in many disciplines now to represent a composite package of a whole bunch of things that go together to produce some overall result. Okay, so the word Gesamtkunstwerk, very important word. So for us, words, scenery, staging, action, lighting, costumes, orchestra, singers, drama, all aspects of this total scheme, complete art work. Now, in the operas of other people, as we've seen along the way, the main vehicle is the singing. That to most people is what opera is. To Wagner, it was way more than that. It was not just singing, but it was this complete interaction. That looks like a fire drill. We'll be back. So they had it in COAS this morning, I noticed. So I guess we'll be back in a little while.
Leave your stuff.
Yeah, you can leave your stuff.
That's weird.
We have plenty of time.
Kyle, do you want to borrow
They're
it?
probably going to time us as to how fast we get out.
Oh, yeah.
Administration, note to self.